The engines on the island of Sodor had been warned that there was going to be high winds late that night, which would continue into the next day. The engines bustled about as they tried to prepare for the worst. Stepney had been helping on Thomas's branch line and was now having a well-earned rest. Just then, Thomas puffed up with Annie and Clarabel. "Hello, Stepney. What do you think of my branch line?" Thomas asked grandly. "It's marvellous. Although, I'll tell you what I miss." "What?" replied Thomas, a little confused. "Something to look at whilst you have a rest. Your branch line is very nice, but when I'm resting, there's nothing exciting to look at. On my line, there's lots of wildlife, and on the main line, this place is like the cricket field." Thomas felt offended. "Cricket? Who cares about cricket? Engines should prefer to look at pretty sights, rather than games like that." And he puffed angrily away. That night at the sheds, the wind started to howl. Gordon was grumbling to the others. "Important engines like me need their rest," he complained. Suddenly, there was a loud screeching noise as one of the tiles from the shed's roof slid down and landed with a crunch onto the ground. "The shed's coming apart!" cried Percy. None of the engines got much sleep that night, but Thomas barely got any at all. By the time his crew arrived, he was still tired. "Oh, can't Percy take the trucks instead of me?" he yawned. "I'm afraid not," replied his driver. "Today is going to be busy enough with these winds, let alone if we had a lion. Besides, I doubt you could sleep over this noise." Thomas sadly agreed. Before long, he was puffing up to the cricket field. There, watching a game take place, was Caroline. On first sight of Thomas, she began to whinge. "Honestly, they will insist on keeping me here in this blistering wind. Heavens know how they can play in weather like this," she said. "Nice to meet you too. I'm Thomas. Who are you?" "I'm Caroline, a poorly looked after car," she replied, continuing to moan. "It's all right for you. You get a nice fire to keep you warm, even when staying still. There are sometimes I wish I could swap places with you engines." "You should tell Stepney that. He'd be happy to swap with you." "Stepney? I still have aches from that blasted chase." Yeah, I heard all about that. Sorry, I must be off," apologized Thomas as he sleepily puffed away. "What cheek! Here I am telling him my woes, and he yawns at me." At long last, Thomas reached Callan. "Hello, Thomas," called Oliver. "How are you coping in this wind?" "Oh, not very well. I didn't sleep much last night." "I can see why. It's a good thing Stepney paid us a visit. I don't think Dalton and Douglas could have handled clearing all of this mess by themselves." Thomas still felt a little offended by Stepney and what he had said, but he didn't want Oliver to know. "Right. I think I'm going to go back to my shed and try and get some shut-eye," he said awkwardly as he left the yard. "And hopefully wake up on the right side of the berth this time," chuckled Oliver to himself. As Thomas puffed along, the wind grew worse, and Thomas became more tired. His driver noticed this. "Not long now till we're back home, then you can get some rest," he comforted. Caroline was still complaining as she watched the game, when out of the corner of her eye, she spotted something. A tree had fallen down, blocking the path. Caroline called out to the cricket players, who eventually heard her and stopped playing. "Oh, we better tell someone," one of them said, but it was too late to warn any engine. Suddenly, they could hear the chuffing of an engine. "It's Thomas!" cried Caroline, and she raced over to the track as she tried to tell him to stop. But Thomas had fallen asleep. Caroline shouted as loud as she could. A quick-thinking cricketer hit the ball towards Thomas. "The wind will stop it before it can get to him." It woke Thomas up. Ouch! What's going on? What just hit me? He could see the tree up ahead. He slammed his brakes and stopped just in time. Phew, that was close, sighed Caroline in relief. What on earth do you think you're doing going to sleep mid-journey? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, apologised Thomas. I fell asleep, but you and your cricketers were very clever to stop me. As the line was cleared, Thomas watched the cricket game continue on. And to his surprise, instead of falling asleep, he became intrigued about the game. As the game went on, he asked Caroline what was happening. Caroline was very happy for the company. As the game drew to a close, the line was cleared. That was fun to watch. Cricket seems to be quite interesting. It can be, smiled Caroline, especially when you're with good friends. Now, you better go and get that sleep. We won't always be here to help you. Thomas chuckled. No, sadly you won't. That night, after a long rest, Thomas met with Stepney. I hear you had a busy day, said Thomas happily. Well, I heard from a clever Carl that I'm not the only one who had an eventful day, replied Stepney. Then he paused. So what do you think of cricket now? It's wonderful. I can see what you meant before now. Nice views are great, but it's even better to watch a game, especially when you're with your friends.